great ultimate. And in this diagram, and the whole development, first the diagram, and then the forces like yin and yang, then the other forces like the 5 elements, and then the emergence of the human, and the values that inherited to the human. Even if you look at the diagram, you know it is not simply anthropological, it's also cosmological. And from the cosmological to the anthropological, the two are so integrated, you look at the diagram as if it's part of it. That's the reason I coined the word, even though some people criticize it, I insist upon using it. It's anthropological and cosmological. If you want to combine these words, what word will come out? You cannot say anthropological hyphen cosmological, that's all right.
Anthro-cosmological?
Anthro.
Cosmological.
You have to get the
Anthropo-cosmological.
Anthropo-cosmic vision. Okay, that's
Okay.
terrific. So remember, if you don't get anything out of this class, remember there's something I made an original contribution. Anthro-cosmological. It's not anthropological. Certainly not anthropocentric. One easy, important implication is that to be human is not to be anthropological. The anthropologists, no matter how extensive they study, they always study human beings, right? Anthropologists don't study animals. Animals were studied by zoologists, and of course plants from botanists. But in the Confucian sense of the human, you really have to go beyond simply anthropocentric. You need to be related to animals, you're related to plants, and then related to the cosmic order. And in Weiming, during your spring break, at least read the Weiming statement on the Great Learning. Just one text, which is long, but it's very, very intriguing and important. And the idea is forming one body with heaven and earth and myriad things, which developed out of an earlier Confucian thinker. But one of the most moving statement in the corpus of the so-called second epoch of Confucian humanism is by this another very impressive thinker of Zhang. This is difficult to pronounce, especially the second word. It's not romanized, using pinyin, Z-A-I. If it is used romanized, it's a different way, called Zai, which is Z, Zhang Zai. Now, Western inscription. Western inscription is that in his study, there's one statement he made, he wrote it himself, and then carved and put on the Western side of his study. So this is not something he composed in order to impress anyone else. It's not something he composed to be circulated among his students. It's something he composed as his articulation of faith. That's his faith, if you want to use that word. Let me read it. Heaven is my father, and earth is my mother, and even such a small creature as I finds an intimate place in their midst. Therefore, that which fills the universe I regard as my body, and that which directs the universe I consider as my nature. All people are my brothers and sisters, and all things are my companions. The great ruler is the oldest son of my parents, and the great ministers are his stewards. Respect the aged. This is the way to treat them as elders should be treated. Show deep love toward the orphaned and the weak. This is the way to treat them as the young should be treated. The sage identifies his character with that of heaven and earth, and the worthy is the most outstanding man. Even those who are tired, infirm, crippled, or sick, those who have no brothers and children, wives, or husbands, are all my brothers who are in distress and have no one to turn to. When the time comes to keep himself from harm, this is the care of a son. To rejoice in heaven and to have no anxiety, this is filial piety at its purest. And this continues. So two ideas. One is forming one body with everything, right? Not only brothers and sisters are all humans, but even all things are my companion. And most recently, and considered a very celebrated idea by an ecologist, a deep ecologist, this idea, our proper way of treating nature is not to treat nature as a collection of objects, but to treat nature as a communion of subjects. This is one of the most important articulation, even though very few people know about it. And this was done in the 11th or 12th century, and how many years ago? Hundreds of years ago, about almost 1,000 years ago. Zhu Xi is the inheritor of all these great thinkers, and in particular, if we look at that statement I made, if you follow the statement, it becomes very complicated. The statement is about one and many. It's about unity and multiplicity. It's about diversity and convergence. And it's related to a great Neo-Confucian idea of the unity of the principle and diversity of its manifestations. So one term that emerges as an extremely important term in the Neo-Confucian tradition, this was not discussed widely, not even discussed in any essential way of the classical Confucians. This is the way of principle, translated as principle. It can be translated as a pattern, as something, or you say essence, that underlies everything in the world. Not just human beings, but plants, stones, and river, and so forth. This is the reason why everything is interconnected. The other one that becomes very prominent is the idea of qi. You're all familiar with this term. And qi, actually, I translate it as vital energy. It is not materialistic alone. It's not spiritual alone. It's a combination of the two. So one scholar at Harvard, Benjamin Schwartz, and translated, I think, awkwardly as that psychophysical stuff. It's a psychophysical stuff. So the mental and the physical are combined as the vital energy. As I noted earlier in Xunzi, that vital energy is the basis for life. And life is the basis for consciousness. And consciousness, life, and this vital energy turn out to be the basis for the human idea of moral sense of rightness, or from the mainstream idea, that which differentiates the human from all other members of the family kingdom. So one idea is unity of all things, embracing all things. I put a lot of emphasis on that. But Confucianism has always been criticized, I think correctly, as the system that puts a lot of emphasis on the hierarchy. A lot of system of differentiation, roles, father, parents, and children, rulers, and ministers, and so forth. And so these two principles, how you integrate it. And one is the idea of all-embracing wholeness. The other one is differentiation. And if you go back, this is a big schematic to two great ideas in the classical Confucian idea. One is humanity. Humanity, as I pointed out, is all embracing. The other one is propriety or civility. It's very situated, contextualized, and historicized. If you encounter another person in a moment, this happens, and you can encounter the same person 5 minutes later, it's a new situation. And that's the reason I want you to understand the analogues as different kind of occasions that Confucius interacted with his students, with other people. And each moment is a light source for us to understand the dynamic process of this great sage. Right? So the idea of one and many. One is unity, one is humanity. Many turn out to be propriety, civility, or ritual, the proper way of interacting